Many years ago, in a lively township not far from Durban, there lived a woman named Tabile. The township woke up early every morning like a rooster that feared unemployment. By 6 o'clock, taxis were already arguing with the road. Vendors were arranging tomatoes in high pyramids that would collapse before midday. And children walked to school with bags larger than their future plans. Life moved quickly here, yet everybody still had time to discuss other people's marriages. Now, among the women of that township, there existed a rule that had survived many generations. It was not written anywhere, no government approved it, but every married woman knew it well. A wise woman always hides money from her husband. The rule traveled from mother to daughter, the way recipes traveled through families. One woman hid money inside a flour container. Another hid it under a mattress. A particularly creative woman once hid 2,000 rand inside an empty mayonnaise jar because, in her opinion, no man ever searched mayonnaise willingly. These stories were often told during afternoon gossip sessions. One Saturday afternoon, several women sat together under a shade tree near Tabile's house. A pot of tea rested on a small table between them. Tea in that township behaved like petrol in a generator. It powered long conversations. One of the women, Nomvula, who strongly believed in financial secrecy, leaned forward in her chair and said, "My sisters, if a woman tells her husband everything about her money, she has already invited poverty." The women nodded slowly. One woman added her own wisdom. "My cousin trusted her husband once. Today, that man is driving a car while she is driving stress." Laughter spread across the group. Then Nomvula turned toward Tabile, who has been listening quietly while looking at the children playing nearby. "Tabile, where do you hide your money?" Tabile looked up slowly and said, "I do not hide it." The women stared at her as if she had just announced that rain fell upward in her house. Nomvula frowned. "You mean your husband knows your savings?" Tabile nodded. "Yes." "Everything?" "Yes," she nodded again. The silence that followed was the silence of women calculating disaster. Nomvula shook her head slowly. "That is dangerous." Tabile smiled. "Why?" "Because men are men." Tabile smiled and said, "Temba is Temba." Now, Temba was not a mysterious man. This was Tabile's husband. Everybody in the neighborhood knew him. He worked as an electrician. Whenever electricity wires began behaving like confused snakes, people would call Temba and he would arrive with a toolbox. He would repair the problem without insulting the owner's wiring decisions. That afternoon, Temba was inside the house repairing a stubborn kettle. The kettle had stopped boiling water 3 days earlier after somebody dropped it on the floor during an argument about who finished the last tea bag. From inside the house, his voice came out calmly. "Tabile, can you bring that screwdriver?" She walked inside briefly, handed him the tool, then returned to the women outside. Nomvula shook her head again. "You trust that man too much." Tabile laughed. "If I do not trust my husband, who should I trust? The neighbor's goats?" The women laughed loudly at that. But Nomvula remained serious. "My sister, I am telling you the truth. Money must always have two addresses. The house address your husband knows, and the secret address only you know." Another woman nodded vigorously. "Yes, a woman without secret money is a tourist in her own marriage." Tabile leaned back in her chair and said, "I understand your advice, but in my house, we do something different." "What could that be?" "We talk," Tabile replied. The women looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "If I earn money from a catering job, Temba knows about it," Tabile said. Nomvula gasped slightly. "You even tell him the amount?" "Yes," Tabile nodded. The women exchanged worried looks. "Tabile," Nomvula said pitifully, "one day you will cry." Tabile smiled. One day everybody cries, but today I am peaceful. Just then, Temba stepped outside carrying the repaired kettle. It now works, he announced. Nomvula looked at him suspiciously. You see this woman of yours? Temba nodded. Yes. She tells you everything about her money. Temba blinked. Yes. You are not afraid you'll spend it? Temba looked confused. Why would I spend her money? Nomvula raised her hands in surrender. You see, this man does not understand the opportunity in front of him. Temba laughed. Madam Nomvula, if a man steals from his own house, he has robbed himself. Nomvula stared at him. Then she muttered something that sounded like a prayer for future clarity. However, while some women believed Tabile was brave and some believed she was careless, life continued peacefully in her household, which was a very annoying development for people who had already predicted disaster. A few days later, on a warm evening after work, Tabile sat on the couch in the small sitting room. The windows were open because Durban heat had decided to behave like a stubborn guest that day. Her phone rested in her hand while she scrolled slowly through social media, and the internet was busy doing what the internet does best, giving advice. Most of the advice came from people who looked extremely confident while sitting in front of ring lights. One woman on the screen was speaking with authority. Ladies, she said, raising her finger like a school principal, never let a man know your real money. Thousands of comments were agreeing with her as she continued. Protect yourself. Men change. Always keep secret savings. Tabile leaned back against the couch and watched the video until the end. Then she laughed small like someone who had seen many things in life. Just then, the front door opened and Temba entered the house carrying a small plastic bag from the grocery store. Good evening, he said. Evening, Tabile replied. He placed the bag on the table. I bought the sugar you asked for. Tabile nodded. Thank you. Temba walked to the kitchen, poured himself water, and then returned to the sitting room. What were you laughing at? He asked. Tabile turned the phone toward him. This woman says wives must never show their husbands their real money. Temba took the phone and watched the video. The woman on the screen continued speaking confidently. If a man knows your savings, your future is finished. Temba returned the phone to his wife. He said. Tabile waited. Temba continued. That is interesting. Interesting how? She asked. Temba shrugged. That woman must have married a different man. Tabile laughed again. That is exactly what I said. Temba sat down beside her and asked, how many comments do the video have? She checked the screen. 27,000 comments. Temba shook his head slowly. Wow. People trust strangers on the internet more than their own spouses. Tabile nodded. That is the modern way. Just then, another video appeared on the screen. A woman was speaking dramatically into the camera. I hid money from my husband for 15 years. Today, that money saved my life. The comments under the video were full of praise. Queen behavior, smart woman, men cannot be trusted. Tabile read several comments, then she sighed. Temba noticed and asked, what happened? Tabile replied, everybody is very sure about their advice. Temba shrugged. That is easy now, especially when you are advising someone else's marriage, not your own. Tabile smiled at him. That is true. Temba stretched his legs and added, marriage advice is like taxi driving. What do you mean? She asked. Temba explained. Everybody sitting at the back knows the correct route more than the driver. Tabile laughed loudly this time. You are not serious. I am serious, Temba said. He leaned forward and pointed at the phone. Those people do not know us. Tabile shook her head. No, they do not know our house. She shook her head again. No. They do not know how we handle money. She shook her head. No. So, why should they control our thinking? Temba asked. Tabile nodded slowly. You have a point. Just then, her phone vibrated with a message from Nomvula. Nomvula asked, Did you see that video? Tabile opened the message and typed back, yes. Another message arrived immediately. You must learn from that woman, Nomvula typed. Tabile smiled. Temba watched her typing and asked, who is that? It's Nomvula. She says I should learn from the internet. Temba nodded thoughtfully. The internet also says people should drink hot lemon water to cure everything. Tabile burst into laughter. You are wicked. No, I am observant. Temba smiled. At that moment, a small noise came from the kitchen. The kettle began whistling loudly like a politician who had discovered a microphone. Temba stood up and asked, do you care for tea? Yes, please, Tabile replied. While he prepared the tea, Tabile continued scrolling through the phone as more advice appeared, more warnings, and more dramatic stories about secret savings. After a few minutes, Temba returned with 2 cups. He handed one to his wife. She smiled and said, thank you. They drank quietly for a moment. Then Tabile spoke. Do you know something interesting? What? Temba asked. If I hide money from you, my life would become stressful. Temba raised an eyebrow. How? I would have to remember where I hid it. He nodded slowly. That is a valid problem, Tabile continued. And I would have to lie when you ask questions. And if I forget where I hid it, the rats might become rich. Temba laughed. That would be double unfortunate for you and the rats. They sat quietly for a moment. Then Temba spoke again. Trust is cheaper. How? You don't need to maintain it, Temba explained. Tabile looked at him. You mean secrets? Yes, secrets require maintenance. Tabile nodded slowly. That is true. That evening, inside the sitting room, Temba leaned back in his chair while Tabile continued scrolling through her phone. The internet never sleeps because advice does not require rest. One video showed a woman standing proudly in front of a wardrobe. She declared, my husband thinks I am broke. She opened a drawer and revealed bundles of cash hidden inside. Never let a man know your strength, she added. The comments below the video looked like a celebration. Thousands of women applauded her strategy. Tabile stared at the screen quietly for a moment. Then she placed the phone down on the table. What is it now? Temba asked. Another financial ninja. The husband believes she is poor. Meanwhile, she is secretly rich. Temba nodded slowly. That sounds exhausting. Tabile smiled. Yes, it is. After a moment, she said something thoughtful. Do you know what I think? What? Temba asked. Marriage advice spreads faster than logic. Temba laughed. That is because advice is free. Tabile picked up her tea again and said, and free things travel far. Meanwhile, across the township, another woman was watching the very same videos. Her name was Zanele. Zanele lived 3 streets away from Tabile's house in a slightly smaller home that stood beside a shop selling airtime and suspiciously cheap sunglasses. Zanele was a hardworking woman. She sold clothes online and had built a reliable business through patience and persistence. Her house looked modest from outside, but inside one small cupboard in her bedroom lived a secret. She had a neat stack of savings she had secretly built over several years. Zanele had never told her husband Sibusiso about that money, not because she hated him, but because she had grown up hearing the same advice every woman heard. A wife must protect herself. So she saved secretly, sold dresses online, collected payments discreetly, and stored profits wisely. Every few months, she counted the money like someone counting small victories. But recently, Zanele had begun noticing something interesting. Whenever she visited Tabile's catering events, she noticed how peaceful she and her husband looked. There was no shouting, no suspicious arguments about money, and no tense conversations. Tabile moved through her work calmly, and Temba helped when necessary. Their house operated like 2 people pulling the same rope in the same direction. It confused Zanele because many of the marriage stories she heard sounded different. One afternoon, she visited Tabile during a catering preparation. Pots were bubbling in the kitchen. The smell of spices filled the air and large trays of food waited patiently on the table. Zanele leaned against the counter watching Tabile walk. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Tabile replied. "You really tell your husband everything about money, don't you?" "Yes," Tabile nodded. "Even your savings?" "Yes," she nodded again. Zanele looked puzzled. "Are you not afraid?" "Afraid of what?" Tabile asked. "That he might misuse it." Tabile shrugged lightly. "If Temba wants to misuse money, he would not need my savings to begin." Zanele considered that answer carefully and then said, "But many women hide money." Tabile shrugged. "That is their choice." Zanele frowned. "You do not think they are wise?" Tabile laughed. "Wisdom is not a uniform." Zanele asked, "What do you mean?" Tabile explained. "What protects one house may destroy another." Zanele nodded slowly, but inside her mind, a different conclusion was forming. She was starting to think that maybe openness was the stronger path. Maybe hiding money created unnecessary suspicion, and maybe marriage should not be handled like a secret bank account. That evening, Zanele returned home with new thoughts sitting heavily in her mind. Her husband, Sibusiso, arrived shortly afterward. Sibusiso was a lively man who believed opportunities existed everywhere. He entered the house carrying a plastic bag of takeaway food. "Dinner has arrived," he announced. Zanele smiled. "You bought food again?" "I saved us from my cooking," Sibusiso said. They sat together at the small dining table. While they ate, Zanele studied him quietly. Sibusiso noticed and asked, "What?" "I want to tell you something," she said. He frowned. "That sounds serious." Zanele smiled. "It's not bad." He nodded. "Good." Zanele inhaled small and said, "I have some savings." Sibusiso paused. "How much?" Zanele mentioned the number and the fork slowly stopped moving in his hand. "You have that much?" Zanele nodded. "Yes." "And you never told me?" "I was only following advice," Zanele explained. Sibusiso leaned back in his chair. "What advice?" "You know now, the usual one. Women must hide money," Zanele explained. He laughed. "Well, you have protected yourself successfully." Zanele smiled. "But I was thinking something." "What?" he asked. "Maybe marriage should not work like that." Sibusiso raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I was watching something today on the internet. A woman was saying secrets damage trust." Sibusiso nodded slowly. "That is possible." Zanele continued. "I also spoke with Tabile." "Tabile the caterer?" he asked. Zanele nodded. "Yes, she tells her husband everything." Sibusiso nodded. "That is brave of her." Zanele smiled proudly. "I want to try the same." Sibusiso looked at her carefully. "You trust me that much?" "Yes," she nodded. He nodded too. That means a lot." For a moment, the room felt warm with honesty, but unknown to Zanele, honesty behaves differently depending on who receives it. Over the next few weeks, Zanele began sharing more details about her finances with Sibusiso, her business profits, savings, and future plans. Sibusiso listened carefully. Sometimes he asked questions or he simply nodded. Then, one evening, he raised an idea. "There is something interesting I heard today." "What is that?" Zanele asked. "A business opportunity." Zanele looked curious. "What kind?" "A friend is importing small electronics," he said. "Phones?" He nodded. "Yes, and he needs partners." "How much is involved?" Zanele asked. Sibusiso mentioned a number smaller than Zanele's savings. "It could double our money," he said. Zanele hesitated slightly, but she remembered something. Tabile trusted her husband. Perhaps trust required courage, so she said okay, and the investment began. At first, Everything seemed fine. Sipusiso reported the progress. He spoke about shipments, mentioned contacts, and sounded confident. But confidence can sometimes behave like perfume. It would be strong at first, then it fades. Within 3 months, the electronics business disappeared quietly. The shipment never arrived. The contact stopped answering calls and the money vanished. Sipusiso looked embarrassed. He tried to explain. These things happen. Zanele tried to remain calm. Okay, and they continued their life. But another opportunity appeared soon afterward. This time, it involved cryptocurrency. Then, a friend suggested a transportation deal. Each new opportunity looked promising, but each new opportunity required capital. And slowly, the savings Zanele had built over years began shrinking like sugar in hot tea. At first, she told herself this was temporary. Investment required patience, right? But one evening, she opened her account statements and stared at the numbers for a long time. The savings were almost gone. She sat quietly on the couch as her mind returned to a sentence Tabile had said months earlier. What protects one house may destroy another. Zanele suddenly felt a cold realization spreading through her chest. She had copied the behavior, but she had not copied the marriage. The next morning, she picked up her phone and called Tabile. Hello, Tabile. Yes, I think I made a mistake, Zanele said. There was a pause, then Tabile asked what happened. Zanele swallowed hard. I tried your method. My method? Yes, total trust, Zanele said. Tabile paused and then asked, okay, what happened? Zanele answered, I realized it works when the man is temper. A long silence settled between them. Finally, Zanele said, I told him everything. Everything? Tabile asked. Yes, my savings, my profits, my accounts. Tabile remained quiet on the other end of the phone. Zanele continued. At first, it felt good. Tabile asked how. It felt honest. Tabile nodded. Well, that part is good, but honesty must meet the right character. Zanele sighed. I see that now. There was a short pause, then she began explaining everything properly. The first investment sounded reasonable. What was it? Tabile asked. Electronics. Tabile nodded slowly, although Zanele could not see her. Phones? Zanele nodded. Yes, and accessories. Tabile asked, what happened? The shipment never arrived, Zanele replied. Tabile sighed. That is a classic story. Zanele laughed weakly. I know now. And after that, what happened? Tabile asked. Another investment. What kind? Cryptocurrency, Zanele replied. Tabile closed her eyes. That word again. And what was the result? It was the same, Zanele replied. The silence that followed was heavy but not judgmental. Zanele finally asked the question that had been sitting in her chest all morning. How do you trust Temba so easily? Tabile smiled. I did not start with money. What do you mean? I watched him, Tabile replied. Watched him? She nodded. Yes, I watched how he handled small things, how he treated people, and most importantly, how he handled his own money. Zanele listened carefully. Oh, you trusted his character before you trusted him with your account. Exactly, Tabile nodded. Zanele leaned back against the couch. I only trusted the idea. The idea? Yes, Zanele said. The idea that openness creates honesty. Tabile corrected her. No, openness only reveals what already exists. Zanele said nothing because she understood the sentence perfectly. Later that evening, Sipusiso returned home. He walked into the house confidently like someone who had spent the day discussing big deals with friends who also had no money. Good news, he announced. Zanele looked up from the couch. What news? I have another opportunity, he said. Zanele did not respond immediately. Then she sighed and asked, what kind? This one is different, he said. How? This time we'll buy a small vehicle. For what? She asked. For transport business. Zanele looked at him carefully. And the money? Sibosiso shrugged. We can use your remaining savings to get it. The room became quiet. Zanele stood up slowly and asked, how much is remaining? Sibosiso mentioned a number and Zanele walked to the small cabinet where she kept her documents. She opened the drawer and removed the bank statements. Then she placed it on the table in front of him. That number is wrong. Sibosiso frowned. What do you mean? The actual balance is lower, Zanele explained. Sibosiso stared at the paper. Oh! Zanele repeated. Did you just say oh? Sibosiso tried to explain. There were some expenses. What expenses? Zanele asked. Sibosiso shifted uncomfortably. Business meetings. What meetings? She asked. With partners. What partners? She asked. Sibosiso looked towards the window. That was when Zanele suddenly understood something. The investment had not been the only problem. There had also been reckless spending, expensive meals with friends, new clothes, even a phone upgrade. She sat down again and for several minutes nobody spoke. Finally, Zanele said, I built that money slowly. Sibosiso nodded. I know. I built it for years. He nodded again. I know. And now it is almost gone, Zanele said. Sibosiso rubbed his forehead. I only wanted to grow it. She looked at him squarely, but she did not grow it. The next morning, she visited Tabile. The catering kitchen was busy again. Zanele sat at the small table while Tabile finished stirring a large pot of stew. Finally, Tabile sat down beside her and asked, so, what will you do now? Zanele stared at the table for a moment. I learned something. What is that? Tabile asked. Advice is dangerous when you do not understand the situation. Tabile nodded slowly. That is true. I copied what worked in your marriage, but my marriage is different. Tabile smiled. Every marriage is different. Zanele continued. Some husbands protect money. Some husbands spend money. Some husbands create money, and some husbands chase opportunity like dogs chasing cars. Tabile laughed. That description is accurate. Zanele leaned back in her chair. For now, I will rebuild slowly like before. Tabile nodded. And this time, Zanele shrugged. This time, my savings will remain private. Tabile nodded. That is your decision. Zanele smiled. Now, I understand that marriage advice is not mathematics. It is character. Tabile raised her cup of tea and said, that is the most important formula. Zanele leaned back in her chair and sighed. You know something funny? She said. What? Tabile asked. If I had followed the old advice, my money would still be safe. Tabile smiled. If you had followed the old advice, you might also have lived with suspicion for the rest of your life. Zanele laughed slowly. That is true. I tried to become modern. Tabile laughed with her. Modern advice is very confident, but confidence does not always equal wisdom. The two women finished their tea while discussing the different ways people learn life lessons. Some people learn from books, some learn from elders, and some learn after their bank account sends them a serious message. Later that afternoon, Zanele returned home and met the house quiet. Sibosiso was sitting on the couch staring at his phone seriously, like someone calculating mistakes. Zanele placed her bag on the table and sat down opposite him. We need to talk, she said. Sibosiso nodded. I know. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he cleared his throat and said, I am sorry. Zanele looked at him carefully. For which parts? All of it, he said. He rubbed his hands together and continued. I thought I could multiply the money quickly. Zanele sighed. quick multiplication usually belongs to calculators. Sibusiso laughed weakly. That is true. I should have respected how you built that money. You worked hard and I was careless with it. Zanele watched him quietly. Then she spoke. We cannot change what has happened, but we can decide what happens next. Sibusiso nodded slowly. Yes. Zanele continued. My business will continue. I will rebuild my savings, and this time we will keep our finances separate. Sibusiso looked surprised. You mean completely? Yes, she said. A long silence followed. Then, after a moment, Sibusiso nodded. That is fair. You trusted me too easily. Zanele smiled. I trusted the idea of you, but the real version still needs supervision. Sibusiso laughed. That is a polite way to say it. After that, Zanele returned to her business that had once built her savings. She sold clothes online again and avoided fast investments. Meanwhile, the story about what happened to her had already begun traveling through the township because stories travel very efficiently in communities where women sit together in the afternoon discussing life over tea. One afternoon, Nomvula visited Tabile again and said, So, I heard what happened to Zanele. Tabile nodded, yes. Nomvula folded her arms proudly. You see, I told you, women must hide money. Tabile smiled. You were not completely wrong. Nomvula looked surprised. Really? But you were also not completely right, Tabile added. Nomvula frowned. What do you mean? The real problem was not the method, Tabile explained. Then what? It was the man. Nomvula leaned back slowly. Tabile continued. Advice is simple, but people are complicated. Nomvula nodded thoughtfully. That is true. At that moment, Temba walked outside carrying a toolbox. Nomvula watched him for a moment. Then she said to Tabile, You are lucky. Tabile shrugged. I am careful. Temba placed the toolbox on the ground and asked, What are we discussing? Nomvula smiled. Marriage economics. Temba laughed. That is a dangerous topic. Nomvula shook her head. You know your wife refuses to hide money from you. Temba nodded. Yes. And are you not tempted? To do what? Temba asked. To spend it, Nomvula replied. Temba thought about that question for a moment. Then he answered simply, if a man steals from his wife, he is robbing his own house. Nomvula stared at him. Then she looked at Tabile. Now I understand your confidence. From then on, Nomvula became the preacher of the gospel. She would tell one woman, advice about marriage behaves like clothing. It may fit one person perfectly, but when another person forces themselves into it, the result may be embarrassment. To another woman, she would say, money secrets do not protect every marriage. Openness does not protect every marriage either. In the end, the real protection is the character of the person you married. Thank you for watching the story. Kindly share your thoughts about the story with me in the comment section. What lesson did you learn from the story? Kindly share the story out with your loved ones and give the story a thumbs up. Subscribe to this channel if you've not done so by now. Until I bring another story your way. Bye!